Well, thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much to you all. It's a pleasure to be back here. I've been here a couple of times several years ago to lecture during the master course and also to visit to look for books and research. And I'm very pleased that therefore this collection is hosted definitively here. It's indeed a precious collection, not only because there is a collection of the papers, there is a files of every case, which means not only the panel report, just the appellate file, and the appellate report, which of course are publicly available on the website of the WTO, but there are also the briefs of parties and the studies by the Secretariat on the issues that were involved in each case. And there is also some follow-up, which I did, and at least in my case, is the case I was involved. So if there had been a 21-5 case afterwards, an arbitration on a reasonable period of time, or maybe even on the sanction if the cases have not been complied with, the VSP discussion concerning the adoption of the report, that you can find, but there you can find it together. And then also academic articles on the issue or comments in the press about the outcome of the case. So on those cases, there is a rather complete information, and also a few extra things, as I recall before. For instance, the GMO case was never appealed, but the Secretariat of the Appellate Body, in anticipation of a possible appeal, had collected material studies, and that's there too. And then I was involved in 2 or 3 arbitrations on a reasonable period of times, and these are also there. So it can give an idea also, not on the case, but how it is. For instance, when they were in Bocconi, some student of mine told me, well, I would like to see how is an amicus curiae brief, not that they were interested in. So it says, here is one, here's another. So what, how does it work? What do parties say? And things like that. And I think the WTI is a very good location for this file. Especially then, it may be, there are 2 other reasons which may be especially important. First, that at those time, until 2009-10, not everything, the use of internet was not so repanded. So the briefs of the parties of other things were filed with the Secretariat in paper. And there was always a nice question that the deadline was 6 p.m. Geneva time. But when the US was involved, they considered that it meant 6 p.m. Washington, and in 6 hours more. So the people, someone had to stay in the office at the WTO to wait for some attaché from the US mission to come. Then the other party, especially the EU, would make a question to the appellate body that the US had filed out of time. But I mean, can you say to the US that we don't consider your brief because it came 2 hours late? I mean, it was a little bit different. And that you can find in the discussions of the case. So, in fact, there are materials that are not easily found outside from this file. And the other aspect is maybe they will remain as, like there was once a permanent court of international justice. It operated from 1921 to 1938, and that was finished. And so this will remain an historical, like I saw the book of Emeritus published on the Tribunal Mixed after the First World War, and this, so the permanent court was followed by the International Court of Justice, but I'm not so sure how or who or which body will follow the appellate body of the WTO after this current term. So maybe they will only have an historical value, or maybe they will be, how was it when there was a focal point of interpreting the trade rules within the international legal law. I will try not to be too long and to look at 3 points. One, which it's the original design of the DSU, how it worked, and how this demise, as I call it, has happened. Why and on what arguments, and how did it develop that the US sabotage this body? Because I will be a little bit frank, I'm retired, I don't have to be too much diplomatic on all aspects. Second, the current situation with the alternative of the MPIA, the multi-party interim appeal arbitration mechanism. Will it work? Will it remain only interim? And then the third, what's next? What are the perspectives? And here, I think there are interesting and maybe disquieting elements now, because one thing is the perspective of the reform of the dispute settlement system, but one is the broader picture today of the geopolitical fragmentation of the global economic order, the crisis of the WTO. And this, of course, adds another layer of difficulty and of uncertainty in what could have been considered just a technical a technical issue. Now, the design of the DSU, of the Uruguay line was to build on the GATT without transforming it completely, not creating a world trade court, but using the GATT system of panels, reinforcing them, making the legal aspect more important, and also maintaining it with ad hoc panelists, that is arbitrators, organized by the Secretariat, and however, establishing a permanent body of just 7 members, chosen with a geographical balance, where appeals in law, like a cassation, could be made against the panel reports, both remaining reports with the DSB, the political organ, having to adopt them, but with a change of the reverse consensus, quasi-automatic adoption. So maintaining this, establishing this 2-tier system, not only to correct or to review or to confirm specific panel findings, but also to maintain the predictability and consistency of the system. And this system worked quite well for when I was still there, and also until 2015, let's say. Maybe too well, because what probably had been thought of being occasional appeals and not frequent recourse to panels, and became a systematic, let's say, judicial arm of the WTO. Because, of course, if you have the possibility to challenge, and it should be speedy as it's written, it would cost you little, because it's not that you have to put down money to make a panel filing or an appeal. The WTO pays all this on its regular budget, and you have lawyers and young legal experts who would like, of course, to bring their interpretation, etc. Why not? And so the number of cases has gone on. The number of issues that have been appealed have gone on. Of course, there have been new issues which were not anticipated, especially, I would say, the trade and non-trade issue, the environment, the protection of animals, the protection of health, and which have been an invitation for legal minds to try to distillate rules in this system. While on the other hand, as you know, the non-judicial branch have been in difficulty. After the Uruguay round, there have been no comprehensive successful round. The Doha round has gone on from 2001 to 2015 in inconclusive ways. And those specific agreements, there have been very few, a couple of them in 20 years. So there have been maybe an overexposure of the, I call it judicial or adjudicatory branch, both at panel level and at the appeal, very many cases, high profile, longer time required, the idea of quick dispute solving for the necessity of commerce has been somehow lost. And this has put some strain on the system. But maybe that was something normal that could have been dealt with by increasing the number of experts, of secretariats, maybe making the panelists permanent, adding new members to the appellate body, for instance. I mean, when the system started, China was not a participant, Russia was not a participant. There were about 100 or less than 100 countries when the Uruguay round was concluded, and there have been progressively 160. Then, however, came in the criticism of the United States. Now, first I'll say what happened, and then I'll try to guess why this happened. Why the United States, which was the pillar of the system since the times of the Carta, of the multilateral order based on non-discrimination, opening of markets since the Second World War, turned progressively more and more against a key element like the appellate body. They started first, I would say 2005, 2007, I mean, first objecting to the renewal, because appellate body members have 2 terms for 4 years, which were considered at my time. So they started objecting silently to appointing their own, let's call it, American member to the appellate. In fact, Mrs. Jano and Mrs. Hillman only performed 1. Then they objected to a member of another country, the Korean member, Mr. Cha, I think it was around 2015, accusing him of having decided against the United States and having being a promoter of excessive, let's say, decisions. And the decisions are, I mean, the dissents are anonymous. The inside decisions are confidential. So one could ask, how could the United States want to police Mr. Chan? But I think some good legal mind in the USTR discovered that although most of the mechanism goes with reverse consensus with automatism, that's not the case for the appointment or renewal of appellate body member. They started saying you need consensus. The consensus was, as a matter of fact, I mean, no one had thought, I think, that the DSP someone would start saying, no, I don't agree, etc. There have been a lot of interest increasingly on the selection, who would be appointed. That's true. When I was appointed, I went to the interview at the appellate body, the question that he had prepared, that ambassadors who didn't know the right answer, but probably you had written also the right answer, asked to the candidates, and that was it. And then I was interviewed by the lady who was then the American ambassador, but she asked me, this is a little bit confidential, by the way. She asked me an interesting question. She was there assisted by a lawyer of the USTR from Washington, She said that, and she was a businesswoman. She didn't know much about the subject. And she didn't ask me whether I was familiar with anti-dumping at that time. Mr. Sacerdoti, if I draw a line and I put here judicial restraint and here judicial activist, where would you situate it yourself? Oh, I said, like the students who don't know very well to answer that. Why? I got the post, so I must be that my answer was better than the other candidates from the European Union. But you see already the concern of the United States representatives that these terms which are typical from US judicial system, you don't have this in Europe, although the Court of Justice of the European Union is accused often of judicial activism. That's it. So the idea that these judges without name as a judge could be dangerous if they overreach, as this is a term that they like. Afterwards, the criticism of the judicial activism overreach. So the United States discovered that they started blocking the reappointment, not for a specific reason, saying, well, we are not confident with the system. You can read 30 minutes. And petit à petit, the members were 7, they became 5, they became 4. There is a rule by which the cases had been started, the one going out would go on working. So de facto, there was the possibility of handling still the cases and having still de facto more than 3. But at certain point, that was it. The minimum says that yes, you are 3 members of the appellate body form a division, and when at the end of 2019 that was finished, only the Chinese lady remained by herself, and the remaining decided not to take on cases that were piling, appeals that were piling into cases that they had not had the hearing before the termination of their term. The appellate body disappeared. And as you may know, what happens, the system is there. Parties who think that the panel report is unfair to them can still appeal. The appeal is an appeal into the void. An appeal panel is not final. The DSP cannot adopt it. There is no obligation, let's say, for the losing party, but there is no decision. So there were, I think, 10 cases then. There are now 25 cases pending in the world. Now, it's really peculiar that the United States, as I told you, who was the centerpiece of the system, although there is a discussion which party at the end of the Uruguay line thought it was appropriate to enforce the adjudicatory arms since in front of so many new agreements, so complex rules, and also, of course, as in all negotiation, you have the uncertainty because you have to make trade-off and certain things are not clear. So say, well, here we have the panels, here we have the appellate body, they are competent people, then we decide the issue. But probably the United States first maybe thought that, well, they would win the case. The other bad guys who close the market and don't let the good exports of the United States be admitted in the country. But when, you know, I don't say that the tide turned, but also the United States lost cases in matters, especially of trade defense, anti-dumping, and so, which are not economically, I think, so important, but are politically important in the United States because they concern industries like the steel industry, which has problems to remain in the market, in constituencies that are important in the elections between Democrats and Republicans, things like that. And then they started, in my view, change the judge, control more who is appointed, try to change the case law, challenge the fact that there is a de facto precedent, so it's more and more difficult to change the jurisprudence on zeroing and things like that. Then I said, well, we'll kill the appellate body in 3 years will do without that. Of the United States, well, probably they didn't calculate the thing, but then with the Trump administration, it became clear, because when the US administration introduced barriers to the import into the United States of steel, aluminum, and other products, invoking the security exception, which no one had practically invoked, when they could have maybe invoked the countervailing duties against silver as a safeguard. And then they have lost the cases at the panel, which was previsible. Then, of course, the United States appeals into the void, and no one can bring to justice the United States in this matter. And that's the same also of other countries. Indonesia appealed against on palm oil and other countries about themselves. So the system became half paralyzed. This criticism of the United States, they have put it in a legal document. There is a report then of the USTR, which is more than 100 pages, about all the bad things that we have done, he has done, his colleagues have done, and probably also the panelists sometimes have done. But it boils down, I would say, something very technical. Here it's written 90 days. The appellate body since 2012 never respects the 90 days. And this is something terrible. I have never seen a big tribunal, international or national, that in 90 days resolve a very important and complicated issues. But okay. And then outgoing members remain there because they use a procedural rule. The United States and also accepted. But the more substantial question, I think, is that, well, big countries, and this we can discuss it, big nations, don't like compulsory adjudication. The 5 members of the Security Council have not really subscribed the clause of the International Court of Justice of Article 36 of automatic jurisdiction, or if they have, like England and France, UK and France have many restrictions, and the US, which had accepted the procedure, went back, and then they withdrew from other treaties with protocols, diplomatic immunity, consular immunity, where there was this automatic. Great countries prefer to twist their arm. Why should they accept a third judge? Did China accept the arbitration of the South Chinese Sea, although it's written and it's based in the United Nations Convention of the Sea? No, they did not, and they didn't comply. They cannot be brought to compliance like the United States in other cases. So you have this back, I think, this context. However, the WTO trade seems different because it's more technical. You have other stakeholders, the business, the importers, the exporters, the producers. It shouldn't involve big political questions, the borders, the sea, the national defense. And so it seems that, my view, with the rule around increasing the level of justiciability and of law-based system was successful. And I think after 20 years, the United States discovered, no, it's not really much accepted. And the proposals that have been leaked in the last weeks, which I will briefly comment, confirm a little bit this. They at the end prefer a system where there is conciliation, like the GATT, the decisions are advisory, then the parties negotiate on these advice and these reports, and of course, a big country like the United States has many tables on which to play to try if really they have a political, domestic, more than international problem, not to comply. So, what has happened next? Well, the other members have protested. I've asked that every DSP to start the reappointment process. The United States goes on saying no. Of course, there are scholars, our colleague Henry Gao says, well, but the appellate body members could be appointed by majority because consensus is a practice of the WTO. But I mean, no big member really wants to go frontal against the United States. You would have appointed, I think, by majority. The United States would deny the legitimacy. If someone would appeal to such an appellate body, the United States would say, we don't recognize it. At the end of the day, maybe the problem would be even more entrenched and worse. So this arbitration was found by good legal minds in Geneva to use Article 25 of the DSU, which provides and allows arbitration within the system as an alternative to panels and to appellate body, to invent a mechanism of arbitration in appeal. So the countries which agree can, based on a model which has been agreed, apply specific cases, and agree an appellate to appoint a panel of arbitrators, 3 from a list which they have prepared, to decide in appeal cases which the parties undertake to respect, to bring to the DSP which has not to adopt it under the rule, but then to comply. And as a normal system, I have seen yesterday, there is something between the EU and Turkey. That was the first case of arbitration, not of the MPA, but agreed on the basis of that, where they have agreed as usual that if there were, if the EU will say that Turkey has not complied, Turkey says has complied, then there would be an implementation process, Article 21.5. So the same as if there had been an appellate body. Only, of course, it's on a voluntary basis. The United States, of course, doesn't participate. You have very important participants, so the EU, China, Brazil, and now also Japan, who has joined a few months ago, because Japan has a case going on in front of a panel against China, and also Australia. So they have agreed that if one of the parties will want to appeal the future panel report, they engage in this mechanism. So de facto, a great many number of countries will go on with the system. It's not just to have an appeal, but then to have a binding decision which has to comply. You can, if it's not compliant, you have countermeasures and so on. But of course, it's the system is what how do you say? It's because some countries don't participate and some may figure Russia doesn't participate, for instance. They can figure out that if it's not in their interest, why should I bind my hands? So this is a little bit how I see the whole thing. So what's next? So the MPA has worked once first EU-Turkey, which Turkey is not a part but has agreed to. And then we have had the first case, EU and Costa Rica, which has delivered a report, an appellate report by these arbitrators. Well, the experience since, first of all, they have maybe fixed some of the technical problem because first they managed both cases to have a report of 70, 80 pages, while in the last cases, the appellate report were 100 or 200. Second, they managed to stay in the 70 days and in the 90 days, even some less. And third, they were able to work without a big support of any secretary. That's also interesting because what is the role of the secretariat? The panelists, for instance, you have very competent panelists, as some sitting in this table, in this room, but there may be also panelists who are don't need to be lawyers. They are trade diplomats. They don't have much time. They're not familiar with all the rules. They are there occasionally, and so they need a secretariat which prepares, makes the research, puts the questions for the hearing, the issues, and then also assists in drafting. And also the appellate body relies in part on this system because they have been very distinguished colleagues. We have ambassadors, retired people, one who was an economist more than a lawyer, or lawyers who were familiar with domestic law, like John Locke, the Justice of the Supreme Court of Australia, but know much about international trade law. And so if you want, especially to respect short deadline, you have to have support. Now, these panels managed to do it rather quickly. I know they had some support by secretary of the WTO, and I must say I had an experience here with a friend of being in a panel, first bilateral panel pattern after the WTO in the trade agreement between the EU and Ukraine. And we didn't have a secretariat, but we contracted a young scholar PhD, former PhD of us, like you may be, and notwithstanding COVID that we had to postpone the hearing, we were able to do it in 11 months. And the parties were pleased of this. So it can give some idea. I must say that both, if you read both of all, they have relied extensively on past case law of panels and on the appellate body. Although on one issue, which is about the interpretation of the anti-dumping agreement, the panel EU Costa Rica diverged from the interpretation of the appellate body. And CC, if you read the DSB meetings when the panel report, the appellate report came not for adoption but for discussion, the US was very pleased. They lauded this report because they didn't follow the case law and would show them that if you don't have a stable organ, then maybe the president will not be followed strictly. So it may be. Now, this, of course, is a question that one wonders. I mean, do you think that it's better that Article 2.4 of the anti-dumping agreement is interpreted consistently in the same way, irrespective of who are the parties? Maybe it can be changed if there are new elements. Or if the United States, you say it's white, and here comes South Africa, and the new panel says it's black, and then come China, and then another panel or another arbitration panel in appeal says it's blue. I mean, consistency should be a value valued by everyone. And of course, the situation is, okay, the US cannot be brought to a final decision, but the same is true if, of course, if the US is the claimant against some other country, against China, for instance, if some of these disputes which now are in the air would be brought to the panels and appeal, because of course the MPA is based on reciprocity, it's not an open-ended. But of course the United States may think that now they are more worried by the protection of the domestic market rather than the opening of foreign markets through the rule of law that they can obtain it maybe by bilateral discussion, that they are focused on this direction. So what will come next at the WTO? At C12, the conference in June 22, so almost 1 year ago, there was, in some surprise, a commitment by the members to negotiate the reform of the WTO and the reshuffling of the dispute settlement system by 2024. And I know there are informal discussions going on in Geneva, but I don't think that there is much, you never know, I mean, many probabilities. First, in the meantime, the MPIA offers a B plan for many countries. Second, you have to bring to acceptance the United States. Now, recently the ELP blog, which is public, has had an article on these contacts, and click here, here comes a newspaper clipping on what would have been the very recent US proposal. And here, what is the proposal of the United States? Practically to eliminate, it's not really very formal, I mean, to abrogate the appellate phase of appellate body and leave maybe something procedural, more similar to an annulment and exit for grave errors in proceeding, the right of defense. So, but not in the substance, which was the idea of the two-tier system. And then to reinvigorate the panel system. I think they have read your article, right? Right. So, to increase the importance of the interim report, which until now many said it's a pain in the neck because we have to appeal, the interim report serves to nothing. You lose 1 or 2 months just to correct minor error. No, that the parties get this confidential draft report, and then on that they should negotiate. So even the panel report would not be really binding and go to adoption, but there would be a phase of further negotiation. It would be kind of advisory. You would go back to the TAN. In fact, I think the US has put a mechanism like that in the agreement with Korea, the codes that the panels would not be automatically, let's say, binding. And also that the role of the secretary in support of the panel should be decreased. They have also read George Pauline article recently on the role of the secretary, which is too important in his view. And of course, then they say something that the panelists should be more competent, technical, and so they go also in the direction of reinforcing the panel. So the competence of the appellate body members will go to the panelists. Probably they don't have, you know, there are also Baron d'Essai, very clear idea, mature by now, but you can see the direction in the sense of making the rule-based adjudication mechanism less contraignant, less coercive, less precedent, more flexible, more responsibility to the members, which is fine, of course, for a big country like the US, but reading this piece of article, New Zealand immediately protested, saying, yes, a small country which relies on the rule of law in front of the United States, or maybe China, just with an advisory report of panelists, that is not enforceable when we go to that. But I cannot say how of course, this negotiation. But I will finish saying the broader perspective is not favorable, of course, I think, to a global legal order run by a multilateral organization like the WTO, based on the principle of equality of treatment, of MFN treatment, with restriction to trade, which are admitted for certain protection of industry against unfair trade. You have anti-dumping, safeguard in case unforeseen, or the security exception only in war-like situation, which Japan have said, and that was the intent of the US. We have the papers in 47 when that article was written in the GATT. Now USTR says, United States has always said that the security exception is self-judging. It's not true. I can see for Mona Paulson, who she's a serious young American scholar who digged into the files of the Department of State and has not. So now what you see the US. There was an interesting article also by Bob House in one of the last issues of the American Journal of International Law. I commend it to you, it's very good. You know, first there was a criticism against the WTO. It came at Seattle from the global, from the non-trade. The WTO is a capitalistic endeavor which favors the big companies, forces to open the market, doesn't protect them. And now you have the United States, which was so key in setting up this system, says, well, for other reasons, I am also not so favorable anymore to this system. You see an article called Biden's New Washington Consensus is Weaponizing Trade. The US accused China to weaponize trade. But this article says it's the US that weaponize trade. That is huge trade restriction and trade economic power to get other advantages and other scenarios and vice versa. You have the extension of the idea that security is not just connected with a military political situation, but it's economic security. So, and economic security, you can beat all sorts of things. Then you have a return to the industrial policy, self-sufficiency, resilience, shortening of the supply chains, reshoring, and so on. Then you have the anti-coercion instrument. So if another country coerces you by use of economics, you can respond. But the concept of coercion is very difficult. And also the EU regulation, anti-coercion instrument, has a definition which is not quite true. Okay, you can have maybe a clear case. China doesn't import any more produce from Lithuania because Lithuania has upgraded the trade office of Taiwan in Lithuania to almost an embassy. Now any European product who has some component from Lithuania cannot enter the Chinese market. But the EU has opened a case in front of a panel at the WTO. I mean, it's always often forgotten that there are rules, and also when the US complains about state-owned enterprise subsidies in China and so on. Well, the WTO offers a problem. Now there are many in Washington who say that we should never have accepted China into the WTO. But they forget that the entry of China, the access of China, was negotiated for years. That China has accepted a lot of WTO plus obligations as part of the and there are instruments that if China does not respect, other countries can go to the dispensation system without probably just going to twist the arm. So, and of course, these examples expand because if one party doesn't respect or use extensively provisions to prohibit exports of its product, not just imports of product, but also export. Now we have a restriction on investments, not only checks on inward investment, but also control on export investment towards the other side, not US companies not supposed to invest in China in production that might help the Chinese to become self-sufficient and competitive United States. Now we have China that responds tit for tat, says the Financial Times of today, that Micron, which is an American company, their product will not be admitted to be used in Chinese products because this might make them dependent on the US, just the same thing that the US had said toward chips and other products. So I think that by using or abusing economic restrictions and not considering the domestic needs, what are perceived the domestic needs, before the interests of global cooperation in economic matters, which are not a value by themselves. It's not that the appellate body must be preserved at any case. It's a piece of an element of international cooperation based on equality, on respect of rules. The rules may be changed, but you need consensus in the current situation. It's very difficult to get consensus, of course. And so, I don't know, the future will be in your hands. Some things, some say, well, it's good for lawyers because there would be more dispute that would go unresolved, and therefore it will be more difficult to advise clients what will be the scenery in country A or B the next year. But I think for many decades, there has been a noble attempt to put rule, to give security and economic intercourses and freedom from obstacles and the idea, of course, you say industrial policies to upgrade the economy, the green transition, but it's very easy that the green transition becomes just sheer protectionism to protect the industries which are not able to compete internationally and which cost more to the finance of each state, in my view, and of course to the consumers, maybe without even a really new possibility of jobs, which then is the idea to the workers of that country. With this, I'll stop and I thank you for your attention.